The comlink crackled to life at 0347 hours ship time. Admiral Sarah Chen had been awake for the past 6 hours, staring at the tactical display that showed nothing but empty space. The Third Fleet hung in the void between star systems, waiting for orders that never seemed to come. "Admiral?" The voice belonged to Lieutenant Torres, her communications officer. His usual steady tone carried something different now, something that made Chen's stomach drop before she even heard the words. "Priority Alpha transmission from Earth Command. Eyes only, ma'am." Chen's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Priority Alpha meant one thing: catastrophe. She made her way to the secure communications chamber, her boots echoing in the empty corridors. The Third Fleet's flagship, the UNS Retribution, was built for war, but felt too quiet now. Too peaceful. The hologram that materialized before her was Admiral Marcus Webb, Earth's Supreme Naval Commander. His weathered face looked like it had aged 10 years since their last conversation 3 weeks ago. "Sarah," Webb's voice carried, the weight of a man who just stared into hell. "Kepler 442b is gone." The words hit her like a physical blow. Kepler 442b. New Eden. The agricultural colony that fed half the Outer Rim settlements, home to 3 million humans, most of them families who'd volunteered for the terraforming project. Gone? Chen's voice came out as a whisper. Webb's image flickered as the quantum transmission struggled across the light years. The Vorthak Empire. They didn't just attack the colony, Sarah. They made an example of it. Chen's hands gripped the console. The Vorthak had been humanity's primary rival for the past 50 years, ever since first contact had gone disastrously wrong. They were a proud species, built like walking tanks with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. Their empire spanned 200 systems, and they'd made it clear that humanity's expansion into their region of space was unwelcome. But this was different. "The children's colony," Webb continued, his voice breaking slightly. "The New Eden Youth Development Center. 800,000 children, Sarah. Ages 5 to 17. The Vorthak didn't just kill them. They broadcast it live across every human settlement in a 50 light-year radius." The chamber spun around Chen. 800,000 children. The youth center had been New Eden's pride, a place where human children from across the colonies came to learn, to grow, to dream about the future. Why? The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. Webb's hologram straightened. The official Vorthak statement calls it a demonstration of consequences for territorial violation. Their high command claims New Eden was built on a sacred burial world. Claims we ignored their warnings. That's impossible. We surveyed that system for 3 years before. It doesn't matter what's true anymore, Sarah. Webb's eyes hardened. What matters is that they just declared war on humanity in the most brutal way possible, and every species in the galaxy is watching to see how we respond. Chen's mind raced. The Third Fleet had 47 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts and a dozen heavy cruisers. Against the full might of the Vorthak Empire, they were a mosquito, facing a dragon. "What are our orders, sir?" Webb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something Chen had never heard from him before. Barely controlled rage. "The President has declared a state of total war. Every human fleet is being recalled to staging positions. We're mobilizing everything, Sarah. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we've got." "Sir, even with our full forces, the Vorthak outnumber us. The numbers don't matter anymore." Webb's interruption was sharp. "This isn't about tactics or strategy. This is about survival. They want to make examples. They want to terrify us into submission. They just made the biggest mistake in their species' history." The transmission began to fade as the quantum entanglement weakened. "Sarah, bring the Third Fleet to the Sol system. Maximum burn. And Sarah?" Webb's image was barely visible now. "Tell your crews what happened, all of it. Let them see the footage if they ask. Our people need to understand what we're fighting for." The hologram disappeared, leaving Chen alone in the darkness. She stood there for several minutes, processing what she'd heard. 800,000 children. The number felt too big to comprehend, too horrible to accept. But as the shock began to fade, something else took its place. Something cold and hard and absolutely furious. Chen activated the ship-wide comm system. All hands, this is Admiral Chen. Report to battle stations. Prepare for maximum burn to Sol system. And, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Prepare for war. As alarms began to sound throughout the ship, Chen made her way to the bridge. The Vorthak had wanted to send a message about the consequences of defying their empire. They were about to learn that humanity had a few messages of their own to deliver. Chapter 2. The Weight of Numbers. The footage arrived 18 hours. Later, Chen had given her senior staff the choice. Watch it or don't. She'd made the mistake of viewing it herself first, alone in her quarters, and had barely made it to the head before losing everything in her stomach. But her officers needed to see it. They needed to understand. The briefing room held 12 people, her command staff, department heads, and the ship's Marine commander. These were hardened veterans who'd seen combat, death, and the worst that space had to offer. The holographic display showed New Eden as it had been. Green fields under an alien sun, prefabricated cities that gleamed like jewels, and the sprawling complex that had been the Youth Development Center, playgrounds and learning centers and dormitories where children from across human space had come to grow up together. Then the Vorthak ships appeared. Lieutenant Commander Hassan, Chen's tactical officer, spoke in a hollow voice. 47 Vorthak vessels, 3 heavy assault carriers, 12 battle cruisers, and 32 escort ships. They didn't send a raiding party, Admiral. They sent a full battle fleet. The footage showed the first orbital bombardments, precise strikes that disabled the colony's defenses without destroying the infrastructure. The Vorthak weren't here to conquer the planet. They were here to make sure their message was received loud and clear. Marine Colonel Rodriguez, a man who'd served through 3 border conflicts, had his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. They let the adults evacuate, he said through gritted teeth. Gave them 6 hours to get to the emergency shelters and escape pods. But the children... The footage continued. Vorthak dropships landing at the Youth Development Center. There, soldiers, massive 4-armed creatures in powered armor, moving through the complex with methodical precision. They set up broadcast equipment first. Hassan continued his clinical narration. Made sure every human settlement in range could watch. Then they... The man couldn't finish. Chen didn't blame him. The children had been herded into the main assembly hall. 800,000 of them. The youngest barely old enough to walk, the oldest just beginning to dream about their futures. They'd clung to each other, confused and terrified, not understanding why these alien monsters had come to their safe place. The Vorthak commander, a massive creature with ceremonial scars covering his arms, had made a speech. His words were translated by automated systems and broadcast across human space. Let this be a lesson to the humans who dare to defile our sacred spaces. Your expansion ends here. Your children pay the price for your arrogance. Submit to Vorthak authority, or face the consequences of your defiance. What followed was systematic butchery. The Vorthak didn't use energy weapons or explosives. They used their traditional bladed weapons, ceremonial swords that could cut through human bone like paper. They wanted the killing to be personal, visceral, impossible to ignore. The footage lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it ended, the briefing room was silent except for the sound of someone quietly sobbing. Chief Engineer Patel, a grandmother herself, had tears streaming down her face. How many people saw this? Commander Martinez, the ship's executive officer, asked in a voice like broken glass. Every major human settlement, Chen replied. The Vorthak made sure of that. They wanted us to see. They wanted us to be afraid. Colonel Rodriguez stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the deck. Admiral, I need to make a request. Go ahead, Colonel. When we find the Vorthak responsible for this, I want my Marines to have first shot. Not the ship's weapons, not a clean orbital bombardment. I want to look these bastards in the eye when we kill them. Nods around the room. Chen understood the sentiment completely. We'll see what we can arrange, Colonel. But first we need to get to Seoul and see what command has planned. She looked around the table at her officers. Good people, every one of them, who'd just watched their species' children being slaughtered for political theater. Any questions? Lieutenant Torres raised a trembling hand. Admiral, my daughter. She was supposed to transfer to New Eden next year. For the advanced engineering program. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. She's safe, Lieutenant. And if we do our jobs, she'll stay that way. Chen dismissed the briefing, but most of her staff remained seated, staring at the now empty, holographic display. They were processing what they'd seen, trying to figure out how to carry this knowledge without letting it crush them. The Admiral made her way to the bridge, where the normal sounds of a ship in transit seemed too mundane for what they'd just witnessed. Outside the viewport, stars streaked past as they pushed the engines harder than recommended, racing toward humanity's home system. Her communications officer looked up as she approached. Admiral, we're receiving similar transmissions from across the fleet. Every ship, every crew that's seen the footage, they're asking the same questions, which are, when do we hit back, and how hard are we allowed to go? Chen looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vorthak Empire was celebrating their successful demonstration. They thought they'd broken humanity's will to fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Tell the fleet, Chen said quietly, that those questions will be answered very soon. Chapter 3. The price of underestimation. Sol system had never seen so many human warships in one place. As the Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace, Chen's tactical display lit up with contact markers. Ships from every human world, every naval command, every independent defense force. The scattered fleets of humanity were coming home. Jesus, Commander Martinez breathed as he studied the readings. Admiral, I'm counting over 3,000 vessels. Chen nodded grimly. In the 3 days since the New Eden massacre, humanity had done something it had never done before. Unified completely. Every petty political dispute, every trade disagreement, every colonial rivalry had vanished the moment those children died. The Vorthak had wanted to demonstrate their power. Instead, they'd created something they'd never faced before. A united human species with nothing left to lose. Admiral Chen, this is Earth Command Control. Please report to Luna Station for immediate briefing. Priority Alpha 1. Luna Station was humanity's primary military installation, built into the moon's surface and expanded over generations. As Chen's shuttle approached the docking bay, she could see the frantic activity. Supply ships, troop transports, and construction vehicles working around the clock. The briefing room held representatives from every major human world. Admiral Webb stood at the center, looking exhausted but determined. Beside him was someone Chen recognized from news feeds, President Sarah Martinez, the first person to hold unified command of all human military forces. Admirals, the president began, without preamble, thank you for coming. I'll be direct. We have 48 hours before the Vorthak expect our surrender. The room erupted in angry voices. Chen heard fragments. Surrender? After what they did? They must be insane. President Martinez waited for quiet. They've sent formal terms. Complete withdrawal from all systems beyond our original 27 colonies. Payment of reparations for territorial violations. And, she paused, her voice hardening, the delivery of 1 million human children as cultural compensation. The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral Webb stepped forward. Obviously, we won't be accepting these terms, but we need to understand what we're facing. Intelligence analysis, please. A holographic display showed the Vorthak Empire's territory, 200 star systems, 12 major shipyard complexes, and an estimated population of 50 billion. Their military consists of approximately 8,000 warships, the intelligence officer continued. Their technology is roughly equivalent to ours in most areas, slightly superior in armor and shielding, slightly inferior in long-range weapons and sensors. Admiral Reyes from the Fifth Fleet spoke up. Even with every ship we have, we're outnumbered better than 2 to 1, And that's assuming we can coordinate an attack across multiple star systems simultaneously. Which brings us to the real issue, President Martinez said. Time. A conventional military campaign against the Vorthak Empire would take decades. Decades we don't have because every day we delay, they consolidate their position and potentially target more human colonies. Chen found herself speaking before she'd consciously decided to. What about unconventional approaches? All eyes turned to her. The president nodded for her to continue. The Vorthak pride themselves on honor and tradition. That's why they used bladed weapons instead of simply bombing the children from orbit. What if we used that against them? Admiral Webb looked intrigued. Explain. Challenge their leadership directly. Make this personal instead of a war of attrition. Force them to respond to us instead of the other way around. The room buzzed with conversation. President Martinez held up a hand for quiet. That's actually not insane. Our psychological profile suggests Vorthak culture places enormous emphasis on personal honor and martial prowess. If we could goad their leadership into single combat scenarios, we'd still be vastly outnumbered, Admiral Reyes pointed out. But we'd be fighting on our terms, Chen replied. And there's something else. The footage they broadcast? It wasn't just meant to terrify us. It was meant to demonstrate Vorthak's superiority to other species. The whole galaxy is watching this conflict. Understanding dawned on several faces around the room. If we can make them look weak, Admiral Webb said slowly, other species might reconsider their alliance with the Vorthak Empire. President Martinez was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing options that all carried enormous risks. There's one more factor to consider, she finally said. Dr. Yamamoto's research division has been working on something. Project Prometheus. It's unorthodox. A new figure entered the briefing room. Dr. Sarah Yamamoto, head of advanced weapons research. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Admirals, Dr. Yamamoto began. What I'm about to share is classified at the highest levels. 6 months ago, we achieved a breakthrough in quantum manipulation technology, specifically the ability to create localized spatial distortions. The room was dead quiet. In simple terms, we can create artificial black holes, small ones, highly controlled, but with sufficient gravitational distortion to cripple or destroy enemy vessels. Admiral Reyes leaned forward. What's the catch? Range. The effect only works at very close distances, less than 1,000 kilometers, and the power requirements are enormous. We can only equip 12 ships with the necessary systems. 12 ships, Chen mused. Against 8,000. 12 ships that can potentially disable or destroy any vessel they get close to, Dr. Yamamoto corrected. Combined with conventional tactics and psychological warfare, President Martinez stood up. Recommendations? The room fell silent as each admiral considered the impossible task ahead of them. Finally, Admiral Webb spoke. We do all of it. Conventional assault on their outlying systems to draw their forces out. Psychological warfare to provoke their leadership into making mistakes, and when we get the chance, he looked at Dr. Yamamoto. We hit them with everything we have. It's still a long shot, Admiral Reyes said. Yes, President Martinez agreed, but it's the only shot we have. And after what they did to our children, her voice hardened. I'd rather die fighting than live on our knees. The meeting dissolved into tactical planning sessions that would continue for hours. As Chen prepared to return to her ship, President Martinez pulled her aside. Admiral, I'm giving you command of the Prometheus Squadron. 12 ships, including yours, equipped with the new weapons. Your mission is simple. Get close enough to their command vessels to use them. Chen nodded. Understood, Madam President. There's one more thing. Intelligence suggests the Vorthak commander responsible for New Eden is High Marshal Korvac. He's leading their response fleet personally. The name sent a chill through Chen. Korvac was legendary among the Vorthak, a warrior who'd never lost a battle in 40 years of service. Good, Chen said quietly. When we find him, I want to look him in the eye before we turn his ship into scrap metal. As she headed back to her shuttle, Chen felt something she hadn't experienced since watching the New Eden footage. Hope. Not much, but enough to keep fighting. The Vorthak had wanted to break humanity's spirit. Instead, they'd forged it into something harder than diamond and twice as sharp. They were about to reap what they'd sown. Chapter 4. When Diplomacy Dies. The battle began not with weapons, but with words. High Marshal Korvac's image filled the main display of every human command ship. He stood in full ceremonial armor, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of dominance. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship, Worldbreaker, bustled with activity. Humans, Korvac's voice carried the arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. Your 48 hours have expired. Have you come to surrender, or do you choose to watch more of your offspring die? Admiral Chen, commanding the human fleet from the Bridge of Retribution, felt her jaw clench. Around her, the bridge crew was silent, professional, but she could feel their rage like a physical force. Marshal Korvac, Chen replied, her voice steady despite the fury burning in her chest. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Human Naval Forces. We've received your terms. And we have terms of our own. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the Vorthak commanders' scarred features. You are in no position to make demands, human, aren't we? Chen gestured to her tactical officer, who activated the fleet-wide display. 3,000 human ships stretched across space in perfect formation. Dreadnoughts and battlecruisers formed the core, with clouds of destroyers and frigates extending in all directions. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Impressive, Korvac admitted. But we both know you are outnumbered. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Counter-proposal, Chen said calmly. Trial by combat. Your best warrior against ours. Winner takes all. The suggestion hit the Vorthak bridge like a physical blow. Chen could see the officers exchanging. Glances could practically hear the argument starting behind Korvac's position. You dare challenge Vorthak honor? Korvac's voice rose. I dare suggest that slaughtering children isn't particularly honorable. If you're so confident in Vorthak's superiority, face us in single combat. Unless you're afraid? The provocation was deliberate, calculated. Vorthak culture valued martial prowess above all else. To refuse a direct challenge, especially one broadcast, across the galaxy would be political suicide for Korvac. Very well, Korvac snarled. Single combat, ship to ship. But when your champion is broken and burning, your species will kneel before the Empire. Accepted. Choose your time and place. Here, now I will face your champion personally. Chen smiled coldly. Perfect. I'll be your opponent. This time Korvac actually stepped back. In 40 years of warfare, he'd never faced a human commander in single combat. His intelligence files said humans were weak, cowardly, prone to breaking, under pressure. The small human female on his screen looked like she could eat his heart and ask for seconds. You? Korvac tried to sound dismissive. The Vorthak do not fight children and weaklings. Children? Chen's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than any shout. Like the 800,000 you butchered on New Eden, Theo? Bridge fell silent. Korvac's four hands clenched into fists. Those were not combatants, they were civilians on sacred ground. They were children. Babies. Some so young they couldn't even walk yet. Chen leaned forward. And you cut them down like animals for a political statement. So don't talk to me about honor, you coward. Enough! Korvac's roar echoed across the communication link. Single combat. Ship to ship. To the death. Agreed. Clear a combat zone, and Korvac? Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. I want your entire fleet to watch. They need to see what happens when you murder human children. The transmission cut off, leaving Chen's bridge in tense silence. Admiral, Commander Martinez said quietly, with respect, are you insane? The Worldbreaker is twice our size and has been refitted with their latest weapons. Probably, Chen admitted. But look at our long-range sensors. Every species in this sector is watching. The Altarians, the Centauri Alliance, the Rigel Confederacy. They're all holding back. waiting to see who wins this fight. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his communications console. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from across human space. Every colony, every station, every ship, they're all watching too." Chen nodded. "Good. Time to remind the galaxy what happens when you threaten human children." The two fleets drew apart, creating a massive arena in the void between stars. The World Breaker took position at one end, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons and armor. The Retribution faced it across 10,000 kilometers of empty space, smaller but somehow more dangerous. "Admiral," her weapons officer, reported, "all systems green. Prometheus device charged and ready. Engineering? Engines at 110%. We can push to 120 if needed, but that'll strain the containment systems." Noted. "All hands, this is Admiral Chen. Today we fight not just for humanity but for 800,000 children who will never come home. Make it count." The starting signal came from a neutral automated beacon. Both ships accelerated toward each other, weapons charging, shields at maximum. Korvac fired first, a barrage of plasma cannons and missile tubes that lit up space like a small sun. The Retribution rolled and dove, using its superior maneuverability to avoid the worst of the damage. Return fire lanced out, focused beam weapons that carved gouges in the World Breaker's heavy armor. "He's trying to keep his distance," Commander Martinez observed, "using his superior firepower." "Expected. He knows we need to get close." Chen studied the tactical display. "Helm, pattern Delta 7. Let's make him work for it." The Retribution began a spiraling attack run, weaving between the larger ship's weapons while maintaining steady fire. The Vorthic vessel was tough, but Chen's crew had trained for this exact scenario. More importantly, they were fighting for something Korvac couldn't understand: the memory of children who would never grow up. "Direct hit on their port weapon. Cluster," the tactical officer reported, "but their shields are holding. Keep firing. Engineering. Prepare for emergency burn." On the World Breaker's bridge, Korvac was growing frustrated. The human ship was like a mosquito, small, fast, and maddeningly difficult to swat. His weapons officer called out target solutions, but by the time the guns fired, the Retribution had already moved. "Bring us about," Korvac commanded. "Ram them if necessary." But as the massive Vorthak ship began to turn, Chen made her move. "All power to engines. Emergency burn now." The Retribution shot forward like a bullet, diving directly at the World Breaker's hull. Vorthak weapons tracked desperately, scoring hits that sent shockwaves through the human ship's frame. "Hull breach on Deck 7, someone shouted. "Shields at 30%. Hold course," Chen commanded. "Prometheus device, fire when ready." At a distance of 800 kilometers, point-blank range for ship-to-ship combat, Dr. Yamoto's weapon activated. Space itself seemed to twist. Reality bent around a point just off the World Breaker's bow, creating a gravitational distortion that pulled with the force of a collapsed star. The massive Vorthak ship groaned as its hull began to buckle, armor plating peeling away like paper. "Impossible!" Korvac screamed as his ship was dragged toward the artificial singularity. "What weapon is this?" Chen's voice came across the emergency channel, calm and cold. "Justice." The World Breaker fought against the gravitational pull, engines screaming at maximum power, but the distortion was too strong. Slowly, inexorably, the massive ship was drawn in. At the last moment, the Prometheus device shut down. The artificial black hole collapsed, releasing its grip on the Vorthak vessel. But the damage was done. The World Breaker was crippled, its weapons offline, life support failing. The Retribution limped alongside the dying dreadnought, its own hull scarred and smoking. "Hi, Marshal Korvac," Chen's voice carried across the communications channel to both fleets. "Do you yield?" On the World Breaker's bridge, Korvac stared at displays showing critical system failures throughout his ship. His crew looked to him for orders, but for the first time in his career, the veteran commander had no idea what to do. "How?" he asked. "Simply, you made one mistake, Korvac. You thought killing our children would make us weak. Instead, you made us unstoppable. The Vorthak marshal looked around his ruined bridge at the officers who had followed him across a dozen campaigns. They were dying because he had underestimated the humans. I yield, he said quietly. Say it louder, for your fleet to hear. Korvac straightened, his forearms held wide in the traditional gesture of surrender. I, High Marshal Korvac of the Vorthak Empire, yield this combat to Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Forces. The communication went out across both fleets, across the watching alien observers, across human space itself. In a single moment, the balance of power in the galaxy shifted. Thank you, Chen said simply. Now let's discuss new terms for peace. Epilogue. The Children's Memory. 6 months after the Battle of Korvac's surrender, as historians would later call it, Admiral Chen stood in the Memorial Garden on New Eden. The planet had been rebuilt, but not as it was. The new colony was smaller, more careful, protected by orbital defense platforms and a permanent naval presence. The Youth Development Center would never be rebuilt. In its place stood a simple monument, 800,000 names carved in black stone, each one representing a life cut short by hatred and fear. Admiral? The voice belonged to Captain Torres, her former communications officer, who had requested transfer to the New Eden garrison. The ceremony is about to begin. Chen nodded, straightening her dress uniform. Today marked the official end of the Vorthak War, though war was perhaps too grand a term for what had followed Korvac's surrender. Faced with the reality of human resolve and capability, the Vorthak Empire had fractured. Some systems had sued for peace immediately. Others had tried to continue fighting, only to discover that the galaxy's other species were no longer interested in supporting them. The massacre of children had shocked civilized worlds, and the human victory had proven that the Vorthak were not invincible. Within 3 months, the Empire had collapsed into a dozen smaller states, most of them eager to establish trade relationships with humanity. How are the negotiations going? Chen asked as they walked toward the memorial. Better than expected. The Altarian Consortium wants to establish formal diplomatic relations. The Rigel Confederacy is offering technology exchanges. Even some of the former Vorthak systems are requesting human protection. Chen smiled grimly. Funny how quickly things change when you prove you're not an easy target. They joined the gathering crowd around the memorial. Families of the victims, survivors from the original colony, military personnel, and diplomats from a dozen species. At the center of the crowd, President Martinez prepared to give the dedication speech. But Chen's attention was drawn to a small group standing apart from the main gathering. Vorthak civilians, refugees from the civil wars that had followed their empire's collapse. They had requested permission to attend the ceremony, to pay their respects to the children their government had murdered. At their head stood a figure Chen recognized, Korvac himself. The former High Marshal had spent the past 6 months in human custody, helping to negotiate the surrender of remaining Vorthak military forces. He had aged visibly during that time, the weight of his actions finally settling on his shoulders. Chen approached the group slowly. The other Vorthak stepped back respectfully, leaving her face to face with the being who had ordered the death of 800,000 children. Admiral, Korvac said in careful, practiced English. I wish to be here today, to honor those who died because of my choices. Chen studied his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something she had never expected to see in a Vorthak. Genuine remorse. Why? She asked simply. Korvac was quiet for a long moment. When I ordered the attack on New Eden, I believed I was defending my people's honor. I believed humans were weak, cowardly, that a display of force would make you submit. He looked at the memorial wall. I was wrong. About your strength, about your resolve, about what honor truly means. And I have grandchildren, Admiral, young ones, not much older than some of the victims here. For 6 months I have tried to imagine someone doing to them what I did to your children, and every night I dream of their screams. Chen felt something unexpected. Pity. Not forgiveness. She could never forgive what he had done, but pity for a being who had finally understood the magnitude of his crime. "What will you do now?" she asked. "My government has stripped me of rank and honors. My own people consider me a war criminal. The human tribunals will likely sentence me to life imprisonment." Korvac straightened slightly. "I will accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate. But first I wanted to speak their names." "What?" "The children. All 800,000. I have memorized their names, their ages, their dreams for the future. It is penance, perhaps. The least I can do." Chen stared at him in shock. "That would take days." "I have time, Admiral, and they deserve to be remembered." President Martinez's speech was winding down, talking about humanity's place in the galaxy, about the price of peace and the cost of aggression. But Chen barely heard the words. She was thinking about justice, about vengeance, about the difference between the two. "Korvac," she said quietly, "if you truly want to honor their memory, there's something more useful you could do than reciting names. Anything. Help us make sure this never happens again. Not to human children, not to anyone's children. Use your knowledge of Vorthak military culture to help us build a lasting peace." The former High Marshal looked at her with something approaching hope. "You would trust me to do this? I would trust you to try. Whether you succeed..." Chen shrugged. "That's up to you." As the ceremony concluded and the crowds began to disperse, Chen remained by the memorial wall. 800,000 names, carved in stone that would outlast empires. Children who had died not for any crime they had committed, but simply because they were human. But their deaths had not been meaningless. The galaxy was a different place now, one where species thought twice before threatening humanity's children. Where the phrase "Remember New Eden" had become a rallying cry for the protection of innocence everywhere. Captain Torres appeared at her elbow. "Admiral, the transport is ready to take you back to Luna Station." Chen nodded, but took one last look at the memorial. Somewhere in that list of names was a 5-year-old girl who had wanted to be a starship engineer, a teenage boy who had written poetry about distant suns, 8-year-old twins who had dreamed of exploring new worlds together. They would never get those chances, but because of their sacrifice, unwilling though it was, millions of other children would. "Admiral?" Torres prompted gently. "I'm ready," Chen said, and turned away from the wall. Above them, the stars shone down on New Eden, and in their light the memorial seemed to glow with its own inner fire. A beacon of remembrance, a warning to anyone who might think human children were acceptable targets. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson. Humanity would go to any lengths to protect its young, and those who threatened them would face a wrath unlike anything they could imagine. 800,000 names on a wall. 800,000 reasons why the stars themselves weren't far enough to run. The children of New Eden were gone, but their memory burned eternal, a light that would guide humanity through whatever darkness lay ahead. End of story.